All right. So again, my name's Nikola. I'm your design tutor, and I'm really excited to be here with you. We're going to be doing a practice class today on drawing site assessments. So in preparation for this, I hope everyone's got a little bit of paper in front of them, maybe a couple writing utensils, maybe a couple colors. Hi, Fleur. Nice to see you again. Hi, Ewell. Hi. So as everybody's getting situated here and arriving, I'd love it if you put in the chat just where you're calling in from, what location you're in, and the traditional territory that you're calling from, if you know that as well. And you can just pop that into the chat. I'd also love to hear in the chat what module you're currently on in the course. Where are you with your work? So if you just want to put the module that you're working on or the project that you're currently working on, go ahead and put a little description in there for all of us. I will say I'm calling in from Southern Ontario, Canada. It is bright and early, not actually bright yet. It's still dark and early here. And I'm in the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Attawandaron people, and the Anishinaabe. And I'm really grateful to be here and also to be talking to you all from around the world. So today, this is, like I said, a practice class. So we're going to be drawing and exploring our site assessment. So what we're going to do today is have an opportunity to get a little bit creative. For those of you who came to the Facing Your Fears class, where we were exploring drawing a little bit more, we were just allowing ourselves to get out of that what can kind of be a stuck place of, oh, I'm just not sure what I'm supposed to do or how I'm supposed to draw, and into a little bit more of a free creative flow. So we're going to do a practice. We're going to do a made up site. Maybe it'll look somewhat similar to your site. Who knows? Maybe it'll be completely different, but it'll just be a practice site. And from there, once we sort of start drawing in and putting in some of the main site analysis, we're just going to pause and together reflect on what opportunities are we seeing here. What might we want to take advantage of? What might we want to start engage with in our site? And so we're just going to do a little bit of a brainstorm session after that. And then we'll open it up and see if there's any questions from anybody coming in. These design tutorials are intending to be a community space for gathering, for talking to each other, for problem solving, and also for workshopping some of our ideas that we're working on in the course, some of the ideas, some of the designs that we're working on. So feel free to have some questions ready for the end. I'll just pop on my slideshow and I'm just going to check the chat as well. Make sure I'm seeing everybody. Hey, everybody. Awesome. That's great to see where you're calling in from. Also, what module you're on too. Perfect. So I'm just going to do a share screen over here. And a little presentation to get started. Can everybody see my screen okay? Can someone give me a heck yes? Yeah, okay, great. So today's the practice class. We're drawing site assessments. Again, if you came to the drawing class, a lot of questions that were coming up for people are like, well, what exactly am I supposed to be drawing here? And do I need to be an artist? How good do I need to start becoming with my drawing? And the big thing to remember is that these site assessments are really an opportunity to do some mapping more than the like fancy drawing. And believe me, we can get good with our drawings. There's some really inspiring permaculture designers who are really great artists as well. And that is something to, I think, aspire to learn to like know that we can get there, but that we don't need to start there. And we don't need to be discouraged if our designs are just kind of looking like bubbles on paper, because that's all it really needs to do. It needs to be able to provide us with good information, and it needs to be able to allow us to make good decisions. So really, that's what we're doing. And I just keep wanting to encourage this with everybody. Permaculture design is a wonderful thing. It is a response to a lot of the breakdowns in our current systems. It is a response in terms of stepping into regeneration, both in our sites that we're working with and in our lifestyles. It can get, as we're learning about it, a little overwhelming sometimes. It's a big adjustment for some people. Some people already have this like beautiful mindset or embodied in it already. And some people, it takes a little bit more understanding and pulling the pieces together. And so it can happen sometimes where we get a little bit serious about it in terms of getting stuck in our efforts to get there. And I just want to remind you that this can be quite a fun process. And so I just want to allow you to remember to have fun as we're going and as you're working on your designs and through the modules. The other thing I kind of want to remind you about as we're doing these site assessments today is that as you're doing yours, keep thinking about going back out to your site and practicing your skills of observation. For those of you who live on the site that you're designing, this can be a lot easier, but for any of us who can have the opportunity to step outside, we start being able to practice observing. And when we're working with things like, well, where are the sun paths through the site? Like, how do I even begin to map that, for example? Going outside and just noticing. And using the full cycle of the seasons, especially if you live a bit further from the equator, you're going to notice more radical changes happening. Go out and notice, where's the sun rising at this season? Where is it rising today compared to yesterday? What kind of a path does it actually track above me? How far has it dipped down? And those types of direct observations right on the site will teach us a lot. It's the same with as we're moving through the modules, the patterns in nature. Go out, actually start drawing them, noticing them. As we take time to do the observations, we allow nature to teach us, which really you can, you can look to, we have many, many mentors to look through to teach us, like Morag and others who are doing amazing work with permaculture, but our first teacher remains the natural world around us. So go out and keep learning directly is something that I really encourage you to do. And then as we're thinking about drawing our site assessments, the big thing to continue to remember is be working from pattern to detail. So we're going to start with drawing out some of the patterns, the larger natural flows through our sites to get an idea of how that is. So we're going to do some of the sun flows, wind flows, water flows, a little assessment of the soils in our imaginary site. So is everybody ready to do this? Awesome. Okay. So what we're going to do is just start with our piece of paper and we're going to do a basic plan. So the very first thing is put your north point on your page. And then from there, I'd like you to put down a building on the site. We're going to say this site has a house already on it. Put down a building anywhere that you'd like on the site. So it can just be a rectangle shape. You can get as artistic with this as you want, adding a little roof gable, or just leave it as a rectangle. That's great too. I'd like you to sort of distinguish the site boundaries. Maybe you want to make it a long rectangle. Maybe you want to make it some type of polygon. Just establish, now that you have your page, where are the site boundaries? So go ahead and draw in a site. We're going to be working mostly with zone 1 and 2 today. So feel free to draw it a tiny little building in a giant site, or draw a big building in a small site. It's totally up to you. Often we're drawing on rectangular sized pages, so drawing rectangular sized sites can be helpful, but you can get a little creative. So next we're going to draw a couple large trees on our sites. Go ahead and put those large trees on the shadier side of your building. So already knowing which zone you're in, which area you're in, put them on the shadier side of your building. And put 2 large trees. You can just draw big circles, or maybe you want to do a couple like a bigger starburst shape. Do 2 big trees, and then in another area, do maybe 3 or 4 small trees. Great. So now if you are in the Southern Hemisphere, we're going to look at the site and be like, okay, what kind of slope do we have here? We're going to look at the contours of our land. So if you just look up at the slide for a moment, you'll see that our basic map example now has some contour lines in it. And contour lines, for those that just need the refresher, we're thinking about these lines and noticing as they move through our site that each of the line represents the same level. So this is the same height. One line here, this is all the same height. So as we're walking along the landscape, we're walking, and we'll notice in this landscape, we'll be kind of walking down or walking along, and then we'll be continuing to walk along the same height, but the ridge will go like this because we're actually walking up and over a ridge here. And then we'll be walking along the same height, we'll be up on top of a valley here. And we notice that the lines, the contour lines, these are topographical lines. So we start to understand how to read them and how to draw with them. The lines that are closest together, of course, are showing us a steeper slope. The lines that are further apart are showing us a more gradual slope. So go ahead and we'll put a few wavy lines in. Of course, this example is like, this is a ridge of a mountain and this is a valley below. But if we're just talking about our own site, we might have a more gradual line like that, anywhere where there might be a bit of a ridge or a bit of a slope, or it could just be, if we go back to our example here, this, for example, is just a gradual slope down this way. We'll notice that there's some lines closer together on this end. So this is slightly more steep. And noticing where the steep lines are versus where the bit of a higher ridge is going to give us a lot of information. So put some lines down. It can just be some simple arches like this, or it could be a little bit more wavy, but put them down, moving your slope so that you have a sunny facing slope. So here, this would be on where I am, this would be a south facing slope. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you'd do a north facing slope. So go ahead and pop some of those in. You don't have to really totally understand what the lines are showing you at this point. But see if you can get like a bit of a sense of, oh yeah, this would make sense if this was the landscape, the lines here. So for example, mine are like so. I've got a little bit of a steep area right here beside the house. So this would be a steep slope facing down here. This would be a bit of a higher ridge. And then it kind of evens out again. Feel free to share if anybody wants to hold up theirs. No pressure. If you feel like it, go ahead. Yeah. Awesome. Good. I'm seeing some great ones. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so everybody's feeling good with their contour lines that they've plopped in? Awesome. Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question at any point as we go. So the next thing I'd like you to do, maybe you've got a couple colors on hand. I've got like some crayons and highlighters and things here that I tend to just sort of keep around because they're fun. No worries if you don't, keep using your same drawing tool, but maybe start noticing now where the water's flowing through the site. And this is going to be based off of the contour lines that we just put down. So if you have an area that you're noticing on your map where you have some contour lines that are close together, where you know that there's going to be a steeper slope in that section, so go ahead and mark down that there's likely going to be more water flowing through the site in this area. You can see in this example that there's a bit of a ridge and this is the high zone. So if it rains, likely the water's flowing gently through the site a little more here, into the neighbor's yard. And it would be moving more gradually down here as well. So go ahead and just put some arrows down in your site. On the building, go ahead and mark down a downspout. And one of the corners has a downspout. Just pick any corner for now. Put a little circle in that corner, and that's going to show us that there's a downspout coming down. So if water is coming out of that downspout right now, imagine we have no water catchment there currently. It's just running right down onto the ground. If it hits the ground right in that zone, based on the contours that we're seeing, based on the slope that this site has, which direction is the water going to be flowing from there? Just mark a little arrow down to notice that there's going to be more water flow right from that spot. It's kind of a concentrated area. Where might it be going? Awesome. So I've just got a few lines like that. Great. The next is going to be our sun paths. So if you're living close to the equator, you may not notice that much of a difference at all. It's going to track a consistent line. You're going to have consistent days throughout the year. It's actually, if anybody's lived or experienced that, it's very peaceful. It's very nice to have that consistency. But for those of us who live most of the time in an area where there's big difference, notice that where your high sun goes, and just put a line across. So moving east to west, where is the high sun pattern or path in your site? In the height of summer, you're probably going to be having it pretty much directly above you. So just putting it there. But of course, if this is the north point up here, for us in the northern hemisphere, we're going to have a little bit of that arch down to the south, right? That's where if our slopes are facing south, that's going to be the sunniest slope. Because in the winter, the sun's going to dip further down on the southern side. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's going to do the same thing, but on the northern side. So go ahead and mark that high sun path and go ahead and mark that low sun path. Raise your hands if you have any questions about that. So that's going to give us a nice visual of where our shade zones might be. So now that you have the sun paths mapped, notice where your shade zones are going to be. Where is it going to be a little bit extra shady? It's going to be behind the trees from where your sun path dips down. It's going to be behind the building from whatever direction, away from whatever direction your sun path dips down in those off seasons. So just mark a little bit of those shade zones, just put some bubbles around there or use a different color. I always like to use purples or some dark colors for the shade paths. And I'll just usually bubble them around and behind some of my permanent features that are on the site. Amazing. And now you can see where your full sun areas are as well. Good stuff. Next, we're going to do human flows. And I find that this one is really, really helpful because humans move like other animals through a site. We'll naturally take the path of least resistance, especially if it's a hilly or a steep slope. We'll almost always walk our way through it in almost on contour, unless we're like really trying to beeline our way somewhere. We'll walk a meandering path or meandering trail. So one of the best things I've noticed as I'm working on helping develop bigger sites, for example, or sites where there's not as much going on there, is to really start walking the site and notice where I'm moving, notice where other people are moving. Or if it's a site that people have been living on for a long time, there's almost always going to be a natural footpath. Even if, there's a sidewalk that moves in a square or a lot of right angles, or if somebody has even like made a patio or some flagstone pathways down into the garden. But where are people just naturally moving? Where are they cutting through the gardens? Where are they cutting through the neighborhoods? Start noticing your human flows through your site, because that's going to give you a lot of information to start working off of as well. So in this example, I'd like us to imagine that there is, or place in our map, a driveway moving towards the house. So it could maybe be coming from the east side, moving into the house, towards the house. So just draw something coming in there. We're going to build a couple things off, permanent features in, so that we can start putting our human paths in. So a bit of a driveway for some of us who still drive. And then we're going to put a footpath from the house towards where those small trees are. So maybe there's a bench in there, maybe there's something in there that we like to go to. So just put one pathway over towards that area as well. And then draw a couple pathways moving back down to the southeast, or wherever it kind of makes sense on your map. Draw one sort of natural pathway. And this will be likely following one of your contour lines, and just let it go off of the map, because we're going to assume that there's a neighbor that you like to visit that's that way, or there's a pond over there, or a really big tree that you like. We're just going to assume that there's something off of our map that we can't see, that we have a natural pathway going towards. So from the house, draw a natural pathway kind of over off of the map. And then take a look. This is a totally imaginary scenario. Are there any areas that you might want to add some more pathways? Maybe you're thinking, oh, right up in here, I think that would be a really great spot. Humans would likely already be moving through this site in this way. Feel free to add a couple more human pathways and human flows to the site. Okay, so I'm just going to end the share so I can see all of you more clearly again. And we're going to add a few more things to our map. So I would like you to draw in a highway on the very south side of the map. So wherever your map is on the very south side, oh, there happens to be a road down there. So just draw that in. It could just be like a straight across line, or it can be a little wavy line, however that imaginary road might look to you. And then I would like you to notice with your colors where we might be getting some pollution coming off of that road. So draw in a couple arrows. They're saying, yep, there's probably going to be a bit of air pollution coming in. Okay. From that building site, where might you have some good views? So if you have any areas that you're noticing looking down at your map saying, oh yes, this, based on the contour, I have a hill below my building. So that would be an opportunity for a good view, but oh wait, actually the highway's right there. So this over here might be a good view already. Maybe you have a couple of your trees sort of right there in the nice view zone already. So just put a little bit of a bubble map around where you might have some good views, and put a couple arrows in where you might have some areas that are not great views, and areas that you may want to think about starting to build up and creating more opportunities for more of protection, more visual screens. So anywhere that you might be like, if I look this way, I could see right in my neighbor's window. Like, it's okay some days, but maybe not the best view. So it would be nice to have a bit more of a visual screen there. So just take note of that. It can just be arrows saying not great view, or maybe arrows that say wonderful view. Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to take a little look at our maps at this point. And we're going to start noticing some opportunities arising. It might look like a messy bunch of crazy lines at this point, and that's okay. But from this type of the very basic observation, we're going to start noticing a few opportunities come up. The next thing I'd love you to put down is in those groupings of trees, just mark those as wildlife areas. We're probably going to notice a lot more birds in these zones. We might have some smaller animals coming through. Mark those as little wildlife areas. And then maybe you can imagine that off to maybe the north side, there's a park or a forest happening over there. So put some arrows up in that direction. That would also be a wildlife area. And for those of us who have moved into the modules around zoning, that would be more your zone 5 up in that zone. So just put some arrows over there distinguishing, okay, that's going to be a bit of a wildlife corridor. If you're thinking about your site being more of an urban area, that's fine. Think about who's visiting you in the urban areas. Do you have birds coming through? Where are your opportunities for wildlife features as well? Feel free to add some of those in. Again, this is very imaginary, so it might be a little difficult to throw on the map, be like, I don't know, where could that be? But we're just getting a bit of a base plan for us. And we're also just having some fun. Just feel like, don't get too worked up about this. Just throw some things down, let it just emerge, because from this sort of like mapping exercise, we begin to start being able to assess it and analyze it. All right. So from this, I'd love us to sort of notice. So where are our sunny zones? Just kind of maybe like notice where the sunny zones are again compared to the shade zones on here already. Where might we have a lot of compaction? If anybody drew a really big ridge, yeah, that we might have more compaction in that zone or more erosion happening. Yeah, Leslie, did you have a question?
Yeah, please. I don't understand about the shade zones because there's morning shade and afternoon shade. So, I mean, at some point it's all in the sun. So
Okay.
What are you talking about? Morning shade or afternoon shade or?
Well, I'm talking more about, do you live near the equator or are you a little bit further from it? Do you have some seasonal shifts?
Tropical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have the high sun, there's pretty much not going to be much shade zone at all other than right underneath some of your trees. So when we're thinking about shade zones, we're thinking about the seasonal shifts. So for example, here in Canada, in the fall and the early spring and the winter, we've got a very low sun. So almost all of the areas on the north sides of buildings or the north sides of trees or forests will have much more dense shade. When we start to map these things out, we can really start figuring out which other plants to put in those areas or how to utilize those spaces. So it's not to say that this will be a space always in the shade. It's just saying, like for me, if I have a western shade zone, I know that would be a great place to plant elderberries because they are a forest species. They like this, they like the morning sun, but they like to have shade in the afternoon. When you see them in the wild, they're almost always growing in a clearing in a forest on those west sides for that reason. So again, we just start to get to see the opportunities that present. And this is a very rough map. So thinking again, if the sun's dipping, I'm going to have more of my shade zones over here. This is like the shady opportunities. I can now build on that, especially for you in a tropical zone. You may want to really start working those edges of your shades wherever you have a bit of shade already to create a little bit more protection, to create a little bit more canopy coverage. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Yeah. Great. So we are now seeing more opportunities. We're seeing, I wonder, did anybody draw a large ridge for their contours? Did you, Fleur?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So yeah, we've got this nice big ridge happening right there. So that's going to be a bit of a drier area because you've got that height, you've got that exposure. So it's great.
Yeah.
So just start noticing wherever on your map, you've got sort of these raised sunny zones, high points that are full sun zones. You're going to start noticing, okay, those are going to be probably much drier zones. There might be, if we've had a lot of movement on the site, there's been any heavy machinery activity like trucks parking there or construction, anything like that, that's going to be a high compaction zone then as well. So starting to notice, and now where might the wet zones on your site be? Put a little bubble around your wet zones. We know we have some examples of water flows through the site. We have some arrows showing, yes, when it rains, this is where the water is going to flow. Maybe you want to mark down if you have a flood zone. Maybe part of your area, you could just mark down, oh yeah, that's going to be a bit in the flood zone. And then if not, maybe you have an area on your site where it looks like you have some steep contour lines, a lot of water moving through that area. Now you have potential there. And if you have a shady kind of wet area like that, just mark that in as well, because that's going to be another major opportunity. Amazing. And the final thing we're going to add to the map before we start doing some more further analysis is going to be a wind flow. So how about we have a easterly wind coming through? So it's coming from the east and it's blowing west across our site. So feel free to put that in. We've got a strong wind coming from the east and moving west. And you'll notice with wind flows that you'll have a dominant wind in most places. And then when you have a storm front, you might notice a totally different direction that the wind's coming from. Have people noticed that on their sites before? Yeah, you may have like a real cold front or real hot front coming through. So noticing where your dominant winds are is really great information as well. The winds now show us, okay, this is like an awesome zone if we have any wind pollinated plants. It's a great zone if we have any animals that need a lot of airflow. If we're going to do any drying sheds, things like that, we can utilize all of these things. If we're working on a bigger site, if we're going to do any wind turbines or any type of like small windmills, this is a great opportunity as well. We also might think, wow, I have a really exposed area now. It's just open. There's no big trees here. I have this big wind ripping right through my full sun zone, which might be a great zone for an annual veggie garden to get started on the site, but it also might be too windy. So where might I be able to put some windbreaks in that could maybe stack in function, also be a visual break perhaps, also be around some of your edge zones that you're working out perhaps. So noticing your wind and just add in a couple more trees now. Based on that. Again, this is fun. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just start noticing what the patterns and the site analysis is showing us and what opportunities start to come from it. So maybe if you've got this strong easterly wind and you've got like this nice sunny open area, just notice where might I want to put a few more of my big trees on this site based on the visual break, based on the water flows. Pop in a couple bigger trees. And you've got a few bigger trees now. Maybe you want to work some guilds off of those. Do you have space for that in your imaginary site? How many guilds could you pop in there? Is it close to your building where you're putting these big trees, or is it further away? If it's further away, you may want to consider these being something like nut trees or trees for medicine that you harvest a couple times a year, or trees for a textile, for building material potentially. These are trees maybe that you're not going to use every day. If it's close to your house where you're seeing this opportunity for a windbreak or a visual break, maybe they're going to be fruit trees. Maybe they're going to be trees that you're going to be going to more often. So go ahead and put a guild down. Mine's a bit further away from the house, so I'm going to put some imaginary guilds down that are resembling more of a wooded area. That would be nice companion planting for some of the species that I want for the wildlife, not as much for myself. And some species that would be great. Building material down the road. Maybe I can come down here and harvest some material for trellising. So thinking about, as you're throwing those in, where you have the large canopy covered. You have a couple of your big trees there. Maybe you want to put some medium-sized trees on the edges of those. Maybe you want to put some smaller trees on the edges of those. Maybe you want some even smaller herbaceous layer on the edges of those. Where are your edge zones? How are you working that out now? And also, as you're plopping some things down into this site, noticing the opportunities, thinking about those contour lines. So we've got a little bit of a planting. Mine happens to be down here. I've got a visual break from the highway or from the road happening. This is the road. This is the floodplain. So we're working up just above it. I've got the wind coming through here. And so this is now creating a visual break. And it's also creating a wind break. And now I have a lot of opportunity in this zone. Looks quite messy, but there's a lot of opportunity there because it's not in any of my shade zones. This is a nice sunny zone. So if we're thinking about succession planning, this would be a great zone to start thinking about putting in a lot of annual vegetables and then gradually turning over to the perennials. So we can be working these edge zones with our perennial plantings and starting to think about gradually turning it over to the perennials and starting with some veggie gardens. Because if you're like me, you really want to grow a lot of plants. You want all the plants to be able to feed you and your family, your community. So the next thing we want to think about is the contours. We've got these amazing contours through the site. How can those start to work for us? If we've got contours that are moving through our site in a meaningful way, in terms of we've got a bit of a slope that we're working with, we now have an amazing opportunity. We have an opportunity to put some garden beds down along the contour lines. So we can be now doing some swales, some dug out swales and berms along the contour lines and creating some opportunities to put some garden beds in. We want to think about, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but it's just kind of pulling together a lot of the ideas. We want to think about our zones. So if we're putting together a garden bed, let's just think about our kitchen garden. So we would want that close to the house, yeah? Zone 1, we want like maybe our herb garden. So in this map, put down where might a good herb garden be? Where is there already a human pathway? How can you plop it down along a contour line close to the house? Where might be a good spot? If you're in an area where you need a lot of shade for your herb gardens or veggie gardens, put it in your shade zones. Quote unquote shade zones. If you are in an area where you need a lot of the sun, put it in the sun spots. So I'm going to put mine close to the house. Over here. And I'm going to work the shape of it to come around along the contour. Now, how many of you have done the patterns in nature drawing and exercises? You've gone out and mapped, Fleur, I saw your hand up. We've gone out and mapped some of the patterns in nature. You've noticed where there's spiral patterns. You've noticed where there's wave patterns. A lot of those patterns teach us a lot. We're going to be doing a design tutorial later on just understanding what those patterns tell us. What are some examples in nature of those patterns? But for now, thinking about those patterns, where could we put in, how could we work some of that into our garden design? So if we're thinking about maybe a wave pattern is an amazing pattern for dispersing energy and for also gathering energy. So if we're going to put a garden bed in, like a larger annual veggie garden, say, think about that wave pattern in the shape of keyholes, a keyhole garden bed. It allows us to access and allows for those vegetables and everything coming out of that bed to be more easily distributed and dispersed. So if you've got a contour line that looks like a nice spot for a veggie garden, a bigger veggie garden, try maybe a keyhole veggie garden along the contour. And if we're working along these contour lines, we have a lot of opportunity to catch and store the water as it's moving through our sites, which is a really great thing. So we've got a veg garden. So I've just plopped a couple to give you an example. I've just plopped a couple. We've got the entranceway. This is a human path to the house. We've got the kitchen garden right here. And we've got this keyhole, larger veg garden along this contour line. This is also along the pathway, the human pathway from the house. So we have some really nice access here. We've got the sun zones. We've got our wind protection. So this should be a good zone. Yeah. So I'm just curious what other people are noticing. I'd love you to put in a couple more features and feel free to share anything that you're noticing that's coming up, any opportunities that you're starting to see. Maybe you can add in a little composting area. It can be a fixed composting area, or maybe you can put the compost close to your house. In situ type of compost. I'm going to put one right in my veggie garden, right near my pathway. And start noticing, well, what else does this site have to offer? What about the humans on that site? Maybe there's potential for a human manure system to be established, composting system that can be feeding some of these. Maybe I want to really bulk up another area and create a lot more fruit trees in that zone. Maybe I see an opportunity for a really nice hangout spot. There's like a zone in here that's just beautiful, would just be a really nice zone for hanging out. Just get creative. There's no right answer. It doesn't have to be your end design. Just start plopping things down and seeing what happens. Because the more we play around in this way, the more free we become with our designing practice. And if we can feel a little bit more free, we have less inhibition, less holding us back of like, no, I can't do that. It has to be perfect. And I just don't know. So put some things down, just let it flow onto your page, see what happens, see what the information here is telling you, and see if you see any really amazing opportunities that you can start utilizing. So I'm curious to hear if anybody sees anything or has any like new insights from this process as we're just practicing drawing and putting some things down. How is that going for everybody? Pretty good? Yeah, great. Does anybody have an opportunity that they're seeing on this map right now that they want to share? Yeah. Good, you've got a good thumbs up, Leslie. Yeah, lots of opportunities being seen. Amazing. Good. So, yep, go ahead, Fleur.
I just noticed on where the contours are going smaller, and we've drawn swales. Well, wouldn't you put fruit trees, or would you not put fruit trees? Because the water's flowing there, so wouldn't the water? It would help collect the water, and so you're not having poolings of water everywhere. You've got fruit trees absorbing it.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, cool.
So if you are creating your garden beds along the contour lines, it means that when it rains, those areas that you've put along the contour are going to pretty evenly absorb the water. So if you've dug out the swale and created a berm, now we need to plant that berm. So you can put some fruit trees in there to help stabilize it, especially if you have a really steep slope. Putting more perennials in there would be great. If you have a little bit more even slope, you can put a few more annuals and do more of an annual dominant garden. But thinking about, as you're putting your trees in, making sure you're not casting too much shade on areas that need to have some sun, right? But also thinking about your companion planting too. So it really depends where you're growing, what kind of arrangement you want to put in. Here, I need to have pretty much full sun for most of my veggies. And so I'm always doing my perennial plantings kind of on the sides or on the north sides. For me is going to be the shady sides. So I'm not going to have any of those casting shade onto my veggie gardens. And I'm going to notice, like, you know, if I want to plant like a dwarf banana or a dwarf peach or apple, for example, here, that I know is going to be about yay tall and yay big. So I have an idea of the size once it's fully mature, and I can work that into the design so that I know, well, that's not going to shade out these plants over here. It's going to provide a perfect amount of shade for these ones here, though, that I really want. So placing them based on these observations is really key. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Does anybody want to share any of their drawing, or are they noticing anything else or having any questions? I'm wondering if it's reminding anybody about any questions they're having with their own design. Feel free to ask if you want or share if you want, but no pressure. Again, this is an opportunity to just workshop through some of these things. So at this point, feel free to put your hand up if you do have a question or something to share. So at this point, we have a very, you know, simple and messy kind of assessment here. We have a site assessment that I would, you know, if I were going out and doing a site assessment, one of my roles is to do site assessments for another permaculture designer who actually lives further away. So I go out and do the site assessments for him, and then he does some of the designs, and we team up that way. So if I were to do this type of thing for him, I would do it on multiple layers so that he had the ability to flip up and flip down, of course. Because this is quite a messy map. And if you don't know what all of my colors mean, it can just look like chaos. But what that starts to give us is a real foundation. It gives us a complete basis for building all of the design off of. This is the information that's absolutely critical for making our decisions as we go forward and being able to make good decisions for ourselves. Does anybody have any ideas in terms of decision making? What we could be doing here? Yep, you will.
Yeah, I want to ask something that like kitchen garden. You said kitchen garden will be good in sunny place and close to house.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain some more information like this? I mean, when we have all this information, we need to use this information to decide our design decision. And then, so if you can tell me more example, like good place, this area is good place for this, and then yeah, something like that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the answer with the permaculture design always is it depends. which is like, okay, come on, I'm supposed to be helpful. But really what that means is that, so there's some general things that we can understand, like with a kitchen garden. We know it's a veggie garden that's providing for us on a regular basis. Like we're going out to it maybe multiple times a day to harvest from. If it has like culinary herbs in it, we want some fresh herbs, we want some of the veggies coming out of it. So it's a place that is high use. And any feature that we're adding, or any feature in our design that we're thinking about, like a kitchen garden, we need to think about how often are we going to it? And if it's something we're going to daily or multiple times a day, then we bring it close into the house and make it easy. Because the biggest thing, one of the biggest things with permaculture is usability. And it needs to be easy. We design for ease of use. So a kitchen garden close to the house would be ideal. I always like to put them on an already established pathway, especially if there's a pathway from a door that's near the kitchen. So whatever your exit is onto your land from your kitchen, like if we're working a site that has like a level floor access out to the garden, then we're thinking about the kitchen garden, ideally right outside the kitchen door. And if we're thinking about like a bigger scale, like for me, for example, my gardens are down the road. I don't actually have a garden right beside me. When I walk out the door, I have a little creek and a tree here, but it's more of an urban area. So when I think of my kitchen garden, when I first arrive to my site, it's my zone 1. It's where my wash station is. It's where my water is for washing my vegetables. That becomes my zone 1. And so I think about bringing those things that, again, we're using really readily, right, nice and close to us to make it easy. For here, this would be a sun zone, a full sunny spot. Again, it would be near a water point for washing. And it would be a spot where I could be growing my culinary herbs and my regular sort of like leafy greens. Not necessarily the things like my broccoli or my potatoes that I'm going to harvest more once, or like the broccoli a couple times in a season. Those ones can be a little bit further away. So if I have something like this design, I have the human path like this. This is the sort of the driveway I put in, and another human path coming from that entrance. But I'm just imagining that in this site, this is out the kitchen door, or maybe the kitchen's over here. You walk out this door and here you go. You have your kitchen garden that has, maybe this is your culinary herb garden. So it's got your walking onions. It's got like some of your amazing culinary herbs in here. And then we've got this type of keyhole design veggie bed, and maybe the ones a little bit further down the path have the ones that we use and need to go to less frequently, like the potatoes. Then there's the ones that are a little bit more frequent, easy to access. Then there's the ones like the tomatoes, maybe could be up here. You're gonna start to think about this concept of bringing the things we used most often closest in everything that you do. As you're designing your garden, you might shift things around and try things out, but that kind of becomes the principle that you're working with there. Does that help you? Will, is that answering your question, or am I missing the sort of the point of what you're asking?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is also helpful information, and but I also wanted to know that the other area, about the other area.
Okay.
And like site analysis and another analysis. What was that? I wanted to talk about. Like when you analyze the wind, and then like in this windy area, you make wind break, something like that.
Yeah.
So when you just I want to know more about when the water flow is like that, then what kind of design will be suitable for there? And yeah, something like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm hearing like a lot of like kind of big picture thinking of like, okay, in this situation, what do I do now? Or what might be most helpful? And I think I'm gonna answer, and I'm gonna open it up to the group. If anybody wants to brainstorm on this, because this is awesome. It's good to get everybody's contribution. I really value what everybody has to offer here too. So I'm hearing some really like, okay, if the water's flowing down here and the wind's happening up here, how do we start utilizing these areas? Yeah. And the key to this really is the analysis. So if you're doing the analysis well, like what we just did together, that information is going to provide you with these sort of niche spots. You're going to say, wow, I've got a steep south-facing hill that gathers a lot of moisture certain times of year. And it also has really windy. Now, what do I do here? And there's not necessarily a place in a reference book that you can flip to for that exact thing. But what you can do is start to notice which plants might I want here? Which features might I want here? Do I want, in this case, a windbreak? Or if this site, based on the site, maybe I don't want a windbreak based on what I'm trying to do and trying to accomplish. So because there's so many factors, it always becomes a it depends answer. But you go back to what am I trying to accomplish? What do I want here? Do I want this to be food producing haven? Do I want this to be more focused on wildlife because I don't have as much capacity to process or distribute a lot of the food generated here? What are you trying to accomplish with the site as you work in the permaculture design is step number one. And that will start informing you of what to plant and where to plant it. When you're saying, yep, okay, now I definitely want to plant like a guild here, that would be a good time to start referencing, well, which plants do I want and need? Do I want textiles? Do I want dyes for clothing? Do I want medicine plants? Do I want building material? What do I want with this site? And then we can design guilds and put guilds in that are focusing on the needs for you. And if it's, say, a fruit tree guild, then if we have a windy spot with lots of moisture and a steep slope, well, which plants like moisture? And which trees don't like to have their feet wet? Because if you have a high moisture zone, that would be a great spot for those water-loving plants. If you have a windy zone, you build up your guild so that the ones that need a little bit more protection are sheltered from the wind. And you can face the trees that are the strong, sturdy trees in that guild into the wind to help create some protection for their friends. And if it's a steep spot, we can say, well, what's the soil like? Is there a lot of runoff here? If I plant something, will it just wash away next season? How do the plants that I'm considering, are any of them really deeply rooted plants that could help stabilize this soil here? We start to look at all of the factors involved, right? But we base it off of what's already happening and where do I want to take it? What are my needs? Or what are the needs of this site or the people that live here? And then from there, we start looking at the specifics of the site and figuring out what can happen here. So that's how I look at it. Does anybody else? I'm realizing we're at the top of the hour. So if, I just want to thank you all for coming too. Thanks for doing this with me. Thanks for being here and sharing some of your time together. I just want to say that, and that you're free to go should you need to go, and thank you again. But I am also curious if anybody does want to stay or have anything to share, any ideas for you all about answering her questions. If anybody wants to contribute to a little workshopping of that, feel free to stay a little bit longer. Yep, Fleur?
Yes. I found I had a dry area, and I was saying this morning that I was just donated a whole heap of native orchids, like native, they're like grass tree orchids. And I thought they would go really nice with the kangaroo's paw, which is another native plant that we can put. And I put them in because it's a very dry area, sort of thing. And I thought because they're very shallow roots, I thought, well, even if we change it down the track, but it will just stop that area from being so dry. And it looked amazing.
That's great.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I wanted to say, just one other thing is, I got to do my first teacher training with young students today, which was exciting. So, but other than that, someone else might want to go.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. It's good that you're connecting with your community so much, Fleur, and experimenting. I will just say you brought up a good point, maybe helpful for Yule, and we'll close it with that, which is that idea, and Morag lays it out so well in the course, I find, where she gets you to do this whole site analysis like we're doing, assess the site, what's available, what are the opportunities, and then start thinking about the plantings and grouping them together, like Fleur was talking about with the native plants together. So maybe you want to think about, maybe more the guild plantings, and which ones could be your native plant guilds, which ones could be your medicine plant guilds or your food plant guilds or your textile plant guilds, and onward based on what your needs are and what you want from your site. And then you can start figuring out where they might go and selecting the plants that are specific for the flows of the site already. Yeah.
That's really nice. Thank you.
All right, good. We're going to be doing some more workshopping sessions in future where you can come with your ideas or your design, and we'll just talk them through and brainstorm together. So there's going to be more opportunities for that for everybody as well. And I just want to say thank you again for coming and sharing and doing this fun drawing activity. If you want to take a picture and share what you drew, feel free to do that. Or put down in the Hive any experience that you had from today, just any takeaways. Amazing. Thanks, Ross. That's great, you all. Beautiful. You can tell you're an artist. Thanks, Elisa. Great to have you here as well. All right, Fleur, so colorful. Artistic touches are amazing. I'm always so amazed what can be done just even in short little sketching time. So that's great. Again, I welcome you to pop it into Hive, pop your pictures into Hive, pop any questions that you have into Hive. We'll keep the conversation going there. And we're going to have more design tutorials in a couple weeks. So I hope to see you guys all there.